Hi, I'm Megan.
I'm Colin, and this is Pet Sitter Confessional,
an open and honest discussion about life as a pet sitter.
Brought to you by Time to Pet and Pet Perennials. The world of insurance is very murky and sometimes extremely hard to understand, especially when we're just getting into this and we have no idea what kind of coverage we could even be looking for as pet sitters. So today, we're really excited to have Colleen Giles-Harris, Underwriter and Manager of the Pet Sitters Associates Group Insurance. Now, PSA is a current sponsor of the show. However, the point of this episode is to talk in general about insurance, how to make sure we are well covered, and some of the common misconceptions that pet sitters fall into when they are looking for insurance. So grab your pen, paper, or favorite note-taking app. This episode is dense. Colleen has a lot to share. So let's get started.
Hi, Colin. Thanks for inviting me to join the podcast. Like you said, my name is Colleen Giles-Harris, and I underwrite and manage the insurance program for the Pet Sitters Associates Group. I've been in underwriting for 18 years now, and I've managed this program since then. It actually started in 1998. So the first few years, obviously I wasn't involved quite yet, but I've been handling it since I started in 2003.
Wow. What I find fascinating about that is that over the course of 18 years, I'm sure a lot of things have changed in the industry. So I'd love to get your insight into that.
Yeah, for sure. The great thing about having this kind of program is there is flexibility. So we've introduced new coverages that are automatically included in our basic membership. And we've also added optional coverages that people can add on an a la carte basis. For example, maybe about 10, 12 years ago, we introduced our what we call veterinarian expense coverage. And that's the coverage that provides coverage for injuries to client dogs, regardless of negligence or legal liability. Typically, an insurance policy isn't going to kick in or provide coverage unless there's negligence and legal liability on the part of the pet sitter. So in essence, a pet sitter either has to have done something wrong or there has to be something they could have done better to have prevented the claim for traditional insurance to kick in, right? Well, we found that there were situations where the pet sitter wasn't negligent, but they felt bad and they wanted to do something to help out their client because there'd been an injury to the dog. So we introduced the veterinarian expense coverage, and that provides $1,000 of coverage for injuries, regardless of negligence. So a good example might be, let's say that the pet sitter is playing with the client dog in the client's backyard, and it trips and falls in a hole in the backyard. The liability on that really is on the homeowner because they had a hole in their backyard that they didn't tell the pet sitter about. So traditional policy might not cover that kind of claim, but our policy is going to step in and provide $1,000 because there wasn't negligence or legal liability. We have that special coverage. More recently, just this year, we introduced a new coverage that we call expanded coverage for client pets, where you can increase that coverage from $1,000 to $2,500. And then you also can increase the traditional insurance coverage for your client pet from $15,000 to $25,000 for an extra $50, because we realize some people want a higher limit. The limits that we provide in the basic membership are pretty good and cover the large majority of situations. I haven't really found that it hasn't been enough, but we've had people come to us and ask for a higher option. And we didn't want to just increase the coverage to everybody and require everybody to pay more. So we offered it as an optional coverage. In the last several years, we also introduced what we call our house sitting coverage, which provides coverage for caring for someone's house when there's no pets there. So we have situations where a pet sitter, maybe they care for a client pet throughout the year, but one vacation a year, the owners take the pet with. But they still want someone to come and water their plants and take in their mail and check on things. So you can add the house sitting coverage to go and take care of the house when there's no pets there. So things like that. We kind of look at what services people are providing, what kind of coverages people need. We've increased some limits here and there when we've realized that we didn't have the proper limits for things. So there's definitely been a lot of changes, and then also just more pet sitters. I mean, it's in the last 15 years, I remember when we first had the program, there were a lot of people who were like, "What's a pet sitter?" Like what's that? Or like we cover pooper scoopers, and they're like, People do that for a living? Yeah, actually, a lot of people do it for a living. So the number of people who need insurance has also drastically increased in the last 15 years.
Now, backing up a little bit here and just thinking about not niche, just basic coverage. As a pet sitter, as a business owner, what are some of the basic things we need to make sure we have covered?
So a traditional insurance policy is going to be called a commercial general liability policy, or CGL for short. And a CGL policy is going to provide you with coverage for bodily injury and property damage caused by your business. And with a pet sitter, that would also include caused by a client pet. So some examples of that might be, let's say as a pet sitter, you're walking a client pet down the sidewalk and you come across a lady who's walking her dog and the two dogs get into a fight. I'll talk about the coverage for the client dog at the end of the example. But let's say that other dog, the third party dog, as we call it, is injured by the client pet. That's technically considered property. I know that's kind of cold, but our pets are considered legally property. So even though, to you and me, they're members of the family, the law says it's property. So when a client pet injures a third party pet, it's in essence damaging the personal property of a third party person. And our policy will provide up to $1 million of coverage for that third party dog. Claim is never going to get that big, but that coverage is out there for them. If that third party person, that lady, she puts her hand in the middle of the fight to break it up and she gets bit by the client dog, we're going to provide up to $1 million of coverage for her bodily injury. And bodily injury claims can get quite large. If the pet sitter puts her hand in there and gets injured by the client pet or the third party dog, we're not going to cover that. Our policy does not provide coverage for injuries to the pet sitter, employees, independent contractors, or family members. That's going to potentially fall into possibly like a work comp situation, which is not what we're providing under a CGL. Now, the client pet, there's two coverages for him. I talked about the veterinarian expense coverage for the no negligence. Or there's $15,000 of coverage if there is some negligence on the part of the pet sitter. So using that example, it doesn't take a lot to shift it into negligence. It might be something as simple as, they had the dog on a retractable leash and it was 16 feet out and they didn't have as much control over the dog as maybe they should have. Or maybe it's something as simple as they shouldn't have let those dogs interact. If the pet sitter is aware of the fact that the client dog doesn't always love other dogs, well, then maybe she should have stepped into someone's driveway or stepped onto the grass and let the other lady and her dog walk past. So it doesn't take a lot to hit it into that negligence category. So that's sort of the basic thing. Also within that, the basic membership that we provides coverage for what we call damage to the real property of the pet owner. So I'm using air quotes there. Real property is the house itself and anything attached to the house. So let's say that the pet sitter accidentally causes a fire or a flood in the client's house, not due to an electrical problem or a plumbing issue. That's going to be a homeowner's claim. But the pet sitter does something negligently to cause a fire or a flood. We're going to provide up to $1 million of coverage to damage the client's house under that real property thing. In order to have coverage for what we call their personal property, which is anything inside the house that you can pick up and move around, like a couch or a vase or the microwave or something like that. The personal property, you have to purchase our optional broadened property damage coverage and bond. And that would provide $10,000 of coverage for damage to their personal property. It also covers theft by employees or independent contractors or third-party persons due to your negligence. That does not provide coverage for theft by the owner of the business, the main pet sitter that we list on a membership, because we're not really giving you, freedom to just go rob your client, right? You can control your own sticky fingers, but you can't control what someone else is doing, So that's kind of how that coverage works. So I say as a minimum, you want the PSA basic membership to provide bodily injury and property damage coverage, as well as coverage for the client pets. And I think the broadened property damage coverage and bond is essential because we really do see a lot of breakage claims. So I highly recommend that as well, although it is truly an optional coverage. So we know some people don't want to spend the extra $100. So that's why we made it optional, but I do highly recommend it.
Yeah, and it's all about understanding what services you're providing, where those services are going to be, and what that liability is. And you touched on that of like what considers negligence there, and that's if the owner told you something and you did it anyway, or you ignored that advice. So it's really important. When I hear that, I go, yeah, we ask all of these questions during the meet and greet. We have them fill out all these forms.
Mm-hmm.
We really need to be reviewing that each time we go to that pet instead of just saying, oh, well, it's in the app or it's in my documents. Like those mean something and will hold you liable if something were to happen because they told you about it. So you need to be following that.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have those conversations with your client and to get it in writing. We're big proponents of contracts and waivers so that you have all that stuff that you can refer back to. If they say that, let's say that you've got a client who has 2 dogs and, Fluffy is allowed to have free roam of the house, no restrictions whatsoever. But little Max has to be in a kennel, right? And let's say that you don't put Max in a kennel and Max gets into the garbage and eats something and gets sick. Well, that's pretty obvious negligence because they told you that Max had to be in a kennel. Well, if Fluffy gets into the garbage and gets sick, that's a little bit more questionable. Was there negligence on the part of the pet sitter because they were told Max or that Fluffy could have free range of the house? So you really have to look at what were the instructions? Did you follow them? All of those things. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Like, yeah, the number of times we've had, well, Max is food aggressive, but Fluffy is not. So Max has to be kept away from Fluffy at all times when you're feeding them. Like, that's really common, at least for Megan and I, for the dogs we take care of. So yeah, Max always has to go outside because you told us that. And that one time, if you don't, right, then you run into some issues of that coverage.
And that the one time you don't, there's going to be a fight, right?
Of course, right?
It's inevitable.
It's always inevitable. When we start talking about coverage, I know one of the things that I hear an awful lot is, well, what if I'm doing this part-time? Do I really need all of that coverage? I'm just doing this, 2 hours, 5 hours a week maybe, or on the side when I can.
I would say yes, you definitely need it regardless because it only takes 5 minutes for a severe claim to happen. And, we hear a lot of people who say that I only take care of my friends and family's dogs. I don't, advertise or market to strangers. These are people I know, right? So my uncle is not going to sue me if something happens to his dog because I'm his niece. He loves me. It's all going to be well and good, right? I hear that argument all the time. But let's say that your uncle's dog has a pretty severe injury that's due to your negligence. I, as the pet sitter, I screw up and I let the dog off leash when I shouldn't have. It tears its ACL. Now we've got a $5,000 surgery. My uncle is going to expect me to help him with that because he can't afford that, right?
Yeah.
He wants me to help him out. Or worse, let's say I'm walking my uncle's dog and the dog bites a third-party person. That person doesn't care at all that it's my uncle's dog. They're going to sue me as the pet sitter, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't take much for there to be a situation. So I definitely think even if you're part-time, even if you're a gig worker, there's the people who are very, a little bit here and there, and it's not as steady as maybe a full-time pet sitter like you guys are. Or even if you're just taking care of your families and friends, our insurance for Pet Sitters Associates is not expensive. You can get the basic membership to cover one person for less than $200. So, that's a major peace of mind. Get just the basic. You don't have to get anything else, and it's going to cover that bodily injury and injuries to the dogs for less than $200.
Yeah, a year. We should add a year, right?
A year, per year, exactly. That's the annual. Yes, absolutely. Sometimes people are like, "Oh, that's per month, right?" No, that's the year. For sure.
Yeah, because when you sit down and you do kind of a risk assessment of your business of when you start trying to draw on these third parties or these potential third parties, that it gets an awful lot real fast, especially if your uncle has people coming over to do yard work or a cleaner or anybody you pass on the street during a walk. All of those kind of things add up really quickly.
And I think that's a good point. If you are aware that there's going to be other people in the home, that's something that you should get documented. So if you know that you're taking care of a dog where there's going to be a cleaning lady that comes in every Tuesday, or we hear sometimes about people who are splitting jobs. They've got the neighbor kid comes and takes care of the dog at lunchtime, but they need someone who can come at night. You want it to be fully documented who's coming into the house. And if you're splitting the job, who's coming, when, and what the responsibilities of each person are. And everybody should have that documentation. So if later on there's an issue, like a theft, let's say that like suddenly their watch has disappeared and we find out that there was also a maid in the house. Well, we need to make sure that it wasn't the maid that stole the watch. I mean, there's other people that were there. So I think that's really important. I'm glad you mentioned that. Get that kind of documentation that there's other people that are going to be involved in the pet sitting or that are just accessing the home.
Yeah. My big thing for us is always who's locking the door. And do I know that door is locked whenever I leave? And, what's the status of that door at all times, especially if they've got other people coming in and out, because then that liability goes through the roof. If you have no idea, if they're like, oh, I've got roommates coming in, I've got a cleaner, I've got this stuff coming in, document all that so that that's not on you if anything were to happen.
Yeah. Document. That's like in the insurance motto. So
absolutely. Of all of these things that can happen, and this can sound like a really scary, really kind of down conversation, but I think it is really important to think of just how serious this can and should be. And we should all be taking it really seriously. I know there are all some of the big claims that you mentioned earlier, but what are some of the more common things that you see come across your desk?
Our most common claims are probably small injuries to the client pets. A dog goes for a walk and steps on a piece of glass. Or you're out on a walk and they ingest something. Dogs' noses are always on the ground, right? And you can try to watch what they're eating, but the next thing you know, they've eaten a sandwich baggie or something and it's caught inside their stomach, right? That happened to my dog. Luckily, we got her to throw it up and it wasn't a big deal, but you never know. So lots of little things like that, or lots of small scuffles between two dogs. So if someone's got a pet daycare or boarding operation, and two client pets get into a scuffle, one and both of them get injured, or a small issue at a dog park situation. That happens all the time. And a lot of times it's not even a fight. Like, I don't want to say their dog fights, but they're both going after the ball at the same time. And one of them's tooth catches the other one. Those kind of things happen all the time. And it can be a couple $100 or it can be a couple $1,000, especially if it gets infected or, they need a surgery or anything like that. So we see a lot of that kind of stuff. We also see quite a few of breakage claims that fall into that broadened property damage coverage and bond. Silly things sometimes, like they were warming something up in the microwave and the microwave broke. Or we had someone once who put her purse down on a glass coffee table and the table just shattered. It was just one of those weird things. Mm-hmm. Or within that, I talked about the real property, so the house itself. Sometimes we've had situations where the pet sitter is closing the window blinds and the blind breaks. That's going to fall under real property because it's attached to the house. So weird, random things like that happen all the time. I see a lot of ACL tears. My dog's currently going through an ACL tear. And I see at least one a week probably, and a lot of times it's not the pet sitter's fault. So sometimes it falls into that no negligence category, but I see a lot of that. That's a really common situation where they're just running around or they jump off something funny or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, those things happen in the blink of an eye, and you might not think of it. Oh, the dog tripped and it kept running, right? Or or the dog just ran into the wall or something. They're playing kind of hard, but being mindful of those things, writing that down, taking them to the vet when you can, immediately in some of those cases, and those scuffles you mentioned. Yeah, sometimes It's not even. Oh, did they even make contact? I don't think they did, but it just happens really fast.
Absolutely. And with taking a dog to the vet, I always like to mention this whenever I think about it. It's really important in insurance that the pet sitter never pay for a claim unless it's a true emergency. So if a dog is severely injured and the owner is not available, obviously take the dog to the vet. And we understand the vet is not going to take care of it unless you pay. That's how all vets work, right? Very few vets are going to let you, give you an invoice. So if it's an emergency, do what you got to do. The animal comes first. But if it's something like, the dog is limping a little bit, does the dog have to go to the vet right now? Or can you wait and talk to the owner and have the owner take the dog to the vet? Mm-hmm. Or is the owner available to connect with you over the phone and give a credit card to the vet over the phone? Whatever possible, you always want to have the owner involved, and the owner should pay the claim if they're available to do so. The reason for that is there's this legal term called voluntary payment. And every state handles it a little bit differently. It's not even an insurance thing. It's a legal thing. If you make a voluntary payment on a claim without talking to a claims adjuster, it can make you look negligent and it can cause some serious problems with the claims. And in some states like California, it can require the insurance company to deny the claim, even if it would have been covered and would have been paid and the insurance company wants to pay the claim. They can't because they made this voluntary payment and therefore have admitted negligence without ever having submitted the claim. So you want to be really careful in those scenarios. And I get a lot of questions about it and a lot of confusion of like, well, I want to help the dog. The dog needs help. I get that. But if the owner's available, they should pay. There's some situations where owners have credit cards on file at the vet's office and they can do that. But we also understand, this is a future scenario, but maybe you've got an owner who's on a cruise or they are in Europe or something. This is 10 years down the line when we're all safe again. I hope not. I hope not that long. But, we get it. Sometimes they're just not available. And again, you got to do what you got to do. But if they are available, you should always have the owner pay the bill and then the insurance company will pay them back.
Have you heard of Time to Pet? Susan from the Pet Gal has this to say.
Time to Pet has helped us grow exponentially. We believe the platform's features make us by far more professional than other companies who use conventional dashboards. They are the software gurus constantly developing and improving the platform based on user feedback. This decision was a good one.
If you are looking for new pet sitting software, give Time to Pet a try. Listeners of our show can get 50% off their first 3 months when they go to timetopet.com/confessional. Well, and I know many of us have veterinary release forms, right? So where does that fall in line with that pay first, pay later kind of thing?
Well, it's a great idea to have that kind of thing saying that they give you permission to take their dog to the vet. I would add on to that a request that if their vet allows it, to have their credit card on file at the vet, because then that way you've got documentation saying, yep, I have permission to take Fluffy to the vet. They want me to go to ABC Veterinarian Hospital. That's their preferred vet. Mm-hmm. And that vet has a credit card on file. And when I take Fluffy to the vet, the vet's going to charge that credit card. I think that would be another step in the right direction of a veterinarian release. Yeah. If the vet doesn't allow a credit card on file, because I'm sure there's some that don't do that, then I would just say, add to your contract that, I'm going to do everything I can to reach you and have you pay over the phone, whenever possible. I love waivers. I think they're fantastic. Highly recommend them. But even the best waiver can be torn apart in a court of law. And that's why it's important to have insurance. So, unless you have the best lawyer in the world putting your contract together, there's always something, it doesn't take a lot for some other lawyer to be like, no, So it's important to have that waiver. And it's also important to have insurance at the same time. But having that waiver might help you out if you do have a claim, to have everybody understand what the expectations were.
I've seen many forms that say, I give permission for the company to spend X amount of dollars to be put on my account for reimbursement later. That sounds like that's not the right way to go with this.
Actually, I don't think that would be the worst thing, because as long as they know, I guess it depends on what you mean by account. If you mean your account, yes, then no. But if they mean their account at the vet's office, then yes. I think you have my permission to charge up to $5,000 on my credit card at my vet. Yeah. I think that would be great. To have you pay for them up to a certain amount, that might get a little bit more sketchy, because again, you're now making a payment on something when it's not an emergency, again, and I want to make that really clear again. If it's an emergency, it's okay. We get it. We want the dog to be taken care of. I don't want to make it sound like that's not important. It is. But if it can wait, you should, because there's some things that obviously the dog's got a broken bone. There is a bone sticking out of its leg. You better take it to the vet now, right? Yeah. The dog ate a candy bar or ate a box of raisins. You got to take it to the vet. Those are serious situations, right? But, the dog's limping a little bit. Maybe wait till the next day, because sometimes that might resolve itself a little bit. Or, the dog just doesn't seem right. You can always call your vet, talk to them, find out what they think. So I think there's some things where, you got to go now. And maybe there's some that you can wait and talk to the owner before you decide what you want to do.
switching that a little bit and thinking about coverage for when we're going into people's homes. You've mentioned a few of them, but is there anything specific we need to make sure that we're covered for?
Well, kind of things I already talked about, but I would recommend the broadened property damage coverage and bond. Some people also like to get what's called a dishonesty bond. That's not something that we offer through Pet Sitters Associates. So a dishonesty bond covers you as the pet sitter yourself, as the owner of the business. It typically requires a background check through the police department, and it typically requires a conviction in order for coverage to come into play. So I've been my client has accused me of stealing some jewelry. I actually have to be convicted before a dishonesty bond typically is going to actually cover me, right? Our broadened property damage coverage and bond does not require a background check. And again, this is for employees or independent contractors, but it's not going to require that you get a background check on your employee. And it's not going to require a conviction, just the assumption that there was a theft. The insurance is going to come in and start asking questions. If we find out that there were 12 other people accessing the house that week, they might be like, well, it's hard to prove that it was the pet sitter and not the maid or not the roommate or whatever. They're going to ask some questions. Our bond is also going to cover defense costs if the pet sitter is blamed for stealing. We call it mysterious disappearance. So I'm the pet sitter. The client says, my jewelry has mysteriously disappeared. I'm like, well, I didn't steal it. I know I didn't steal it, right? But they blame me and they take me to court. Our policy is going to cover defending me, right, as the pet sitter. But if we end up finding during the claims investigation a video of me at the pawn shop selling the jewelry, well, now I'm not going to be covered because I actually did steal it. But I get defense costs as the owner of the business. But if my employee steals that jewelry, even if we see her at the pawn shop, there's still going to be $10,000 of coverage because it's my employee and I can't control what she does. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So I think that having some version of a bond is a good idea. And, it just depends. Obviously, I don't think anyone plans on stealing from their client, but if assuming that you're an honest person and you're not going to steal from your client, the kind of coverage that we're providing is sufficient because it's going to defend you if accused, and it's going to cover your employees and independent contractors or even an incidental helper. So maybe it's Christmas time and you have to have someone come and help out just a little bit here and there, but they're not a full employee and they steal something. Or let's say as the pet sitter, I negligently leave the front door unlocked. You sound like you do a great job making sure the door's locked, but every once in a while, I might forget to unlock, the door gets left unlocked and someone breaks in and steals the jewelry. We'd cover that up to $10,000. If someone breaks into the house and you didn't do anything wrong, you locked up everything you were supposed to, you left the lights on like you were supposed to, that's going to be a homeowner's claim. But if you as the pet sitter negligently left the door open, or something like that, there's going to be some coverage for third-party thefts as well. I think that's something to think about, depending on how you want to handle the situation. I should mention, too, that with the broadened property damage coverage and bond, if you have an employee or an independent contractor who you are aware of has a previous charge or conviction of theft, we're not going to cover that person for theft. So if you choose to hire John as your employee and you know that John, back in his teenage years or his college years, he had little sticky fingers, hey, you can still hire him. That's your prerogative. We're going to cover him for injuries to the dogs. We're going to cover him for regular liability. But John's no longer going to have theft coverage because you knowingly hired him. We're not asking you to do a background check, but if you know, then it's not really fair to have us cover theft if you know he has a history of it. So just a little caveat.
Sure. I'm sure there's a lot of those in your line of work.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned employees, and this was something I did want to get to was, what kind of coverage options should we be considering as we grow and add people, as we add employees?
Yeah. So definitely it's going to depend on where your insurance is through. I'm sure that there's situations where maybe it's not, you don't have to add them one by one. But with the Pet Sitters Associates, we do require that employees be added. And independent contractors, we want to have them added if they don't have their own insurance or if they have insurance through somebody other than Pet Sitters Associates. So if I am the main pet sitter and I have Susie as an independent contractor, and she's also a member of Pet Sitters Associates for her own business, but then she works for me as an IC, we don't require that I add Susie to my membership because any claims involving Susie will just go on Susie's membership. And we kind of feel like we're double charging if we did that, which isn't really fair, right? But let's say Susie doesn't have insurance at all, or she has insurance through somebody other than Pet Sitters Associates, then I have to add her to my membership because that's the only way that I know that she has the same coverage that I want her to have. So it kind of comes down to employee. Of course, that's going to be a W-2 situation. They have to be added. Independent contractor, which is a 1099 type situation, if they don't have insurance or insurance through somebody other than PSA, then you have to add them. So that's kind of a little special thing with our policy. You want to make sure that you have them covered under your membership. And again, if you have insurance through somebody other than Pet Sitters Associates, you'd want to look and see how their program works or how your insurance works with them and if you have to add them or not. So I'm sure it might be a little different for other groups.
I did want to touch on this. You've used the word membership when referring to Pet Sitters Associates. What makes Pet Sitters Associates different in the way they administer their insurance policies?
So first of all, from an insurance perspective, it's called a master policy program, which means that we have one master policy with one policy number that covers all the members that are added from July 1st to July 1st. So that's our policy term. So everybody in that time period is going to have the same policy number, but each individual person has their own 5-digit membership ID number that's distinctive to that membership. And they each have their own limits of insurance. So one person's claims aren't going to deplete somebody else's limits of insurance. So that's an important thing. But by having everybody on one master policy like that, we can avoid policy minimum premiums, which is what makes insurance expensive when you go to like a regular insurance agent. Insurance companies require, if you're going to write a policy with us, we need $500. That's the minimum we need, right? Or whatever the number might be. We don't have to do that because everyone's on one policy. We can just charge the rate that we feel is appropriate, which is the $190 for the basic. So that's one thing about how our insurance is written. It's a membership because there's other things too. They have a quarterly newsletter that the association sends out that's got tips and tricks and fun little things that help pet sitters grow. There's some discounts available through educational opportunities or different things like that you can get because you're a member of Pet Sitters Associates. Obviously, the biggest benefit is the insurance. They also have a directory that you can be on. So if you want to be part of their directory, it's another opportunity to market your business. I don't really understand any of this, but my understanding too is that if you are on a search engine like that, it can help your Google ratings because the more places your website is listed, it helps Google. I don't know. That's what I was told. I don't really understand. But, anything that helps you get up on the Google rating, I suppose, is a good thing.
Right. Making that clarification of it's being underwritten under that one group policy, kind of like if you've had insurance, like health insurance through a company beforehand, right? Everyone's covered under the same policy, but you get your own individual number that has your own limits and everything underneath that. So it sounds like it's very similar to that.
Very similar, yeah. And that's also why when you get your health insurance through, your company or whatever under a group policy, it's typically cheaper than if you go to a insurance agent and get your own health insurance policy just for your family. It's going to be more expensive. So yeah, that's a great analogy.
Okay, because that was one question I had can I just use my own personal insurance for my business, and why would that not be a good option?
So personal insurance and commercial insurance are two very different things. So your personal insurance, like your homeowner's policy, is going to provide you with coverage for liability on a personal basis. Thinking about dogs, so my personal dog is covered under my homeowner's policy. I have liability coverage for her if she injures somebody in my house or on my property, if she's with me, or even if she's at large. So if my dog runs out the front door and runs away and she's at large and she injures somebody, my personal liability insurance through my homeowner's or renter's insurance is going to provide me with coverage for those injuries that she caused, but it's covering me on a personal basis. Once you form a business, you need what's called commercial insurance to cover the business liability. So they're two very different things. I highly recommend homeowners or renters insurance for everybody. I think that unfortunately, a lot of people in the world don't have renters insurance, and that's very scary to me. And I don't even really care. Like I have a 26-year-old stepdaughter, and I don't really care if her stuff gets stolen. She doesn't exactly have like the highest quality of furniture and stuff yet. She's only 26, right? If her house gets robbed, whatever. But she needs that liability insurance. She's got a couple of cats, and if someone comes over for a party and the cat scratches them and that gets infected and they end up in the hospital, she needs liability insurance. It's going to cover the liability caused by her cat. That kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's just seeing where those lines are and what activities you're involved in, whether that's personal or that's through your business, and how you have that set up.
Absolutely.
I know you mentioned earlier you really like waivers and signing forms like that. And I know one of the first thoughts that Megan and I had when we first started pet sitting was, well, can't we just like make a waiver that says I'll never sue you regardless and have my client sign that? Is that an option?
Well, you can, go for it. I love that idea. Sort of a, dirty little secret about waivers is we're hoping that it deters people. So let's say, you go to the fair and you're going to go on one of those like trampoline things with the harness, right? And you like jump up really high. I don't know if they have those where you are, but those kind of, sometimes when you're at the fair, you have to sign a little waiver saying, I'm not going to sue you if I get hurt, right? Great. They're hoping that if you get hurt, you're like, well, I signed a waiver, right? But that doesn't necessarily stop my husband from suing them, right?
Yeah.
I signed the waiver. If I die on that trampoline thing, I guarantee my husband's going to sue them. He's not going to care that I signed a waiver, right?
Yeah.
But the hope is that if you get hurt, you're like, oh, I signed a waiver. I'm not going to sue you. And so we want people to sign waivers because obviously they're acknowledging that there is something going on and that there could be an incident. And yeah, I get that I'm not going to sue you. So my dog goes to dog daycare and I signed a waiver saying that if my dog gets hurt there or injures somebody else, I will take responsibility for it, which I would because that's the kind of person I am. But and I'm not going to sue the dog daycare, but it doesn't say anything about me not suing the other dog owner. So if another dog at the dog daycare viciously attacks my dog, I could still sue that other person, right? So there's always those little like caveats. And I should make this very clear. I'm not an attorney. So I can't give you legal advice. This is just things I've learned over the years. I am not an attorney. Sure. But waivers are going to hopefully deter someone from suing you because they acknowledged previously that there was an exposure there and, everyone understands that, but they still could, which is why it's so important that you also have insurance.
Right. You mentioned earlier about a good lawyer is going to be able to wiggle through most of that wording in any way possible. Mm-hmm. So still having
or even just the defense.
Right.
That's like, I don't think people think about that sometimes. So you might have a claim situation that's not going to be covered. The claim isn't covered because there was a waiver or something like that. And let's say it's a great waiver and it stands up and we're not going to cover it because of the waiver, but the person still sues you. You still have to go to court. You still have to have lawyer expenses and those kind of things. The defense costs are still something that you want to have covered in that scenario. And an important thing to always look at in your insurance is, are the defense costs inside the limits or outside the limits, right? So our policy is outside the limits, meaning that any defense costs that the insurance company incurs while defending your claim are not going to deplete your limits. So we have $1 million bodily injury occurrence limit. Let's say someone is seriously hurt and it's, $800,000. And we actually did have an $800,000 claim that got paid out a couple of years ago. The defense costs were $350,000. So if our defense costs were inside the limits, that would have lowered our limit from $1 million to $650,000, right? My math skills. So that's all that would have been left. And when the court said, you owe $800,000, the insured would have had to come up with $150,000 because our limit had been depleted, right?
Right.
But our defense costs are outside the limit. So it didn't matter that there were $350,000 of defense costs. There was still the full $1 million available to pay the loss. Some insurance policies do have it inside the limit. So that's something that it's important to look at in your insurance. How is your defense cost set up? Because you always want, whenever possible, outside the limits.
Thinking about that really big claim that you said, is how large can these claims get when we're talking about court costs or anything like that?
Okay, so obviously, like we said earlier, the majority of the claims we see are going to be on the smaller side. A few $100s to a few $1,000s are definitely the more common claims. The $800,000 claim was a situation. What happened in that case was a pet sitter was walking a client dog, and I don't even believe the dog made contact with the person, but she was startled by the dog jumping up, right? And then she fell over and she hit her head, and there was like brain damage. She was hospitalized for a long time. She couldn't work. It was really bad. And $800,000 were all her medical expenses and all the other things that come into play when someone has that severe of an injury. Definitely unusual, but a big one. We also had a couple of claims that within about a few months, we had a pet sitter who was walking a dog and the dog bit somebody. And we paid that claim, and it ended up being about $200,000 or $300,000. That pet sitter continued to walk that same dog, and only within a couple of months later, the dog bit again. And he actually took the dog the second time into like a cafe or something with people. So like he wasn't even trying to avoid people. He went someplace where there were a lot of people. And so the second claim also, the medical bills and whatnot were in the $200,000 to $300,000 range, but double liability came into play. So that's another legal thing. Every state's a little bit different, but in Wisconsin, where I am, if you have a dog that has a history of biting and it bites a second time, there's double liability. So automatically you have to pay twice as much for what costs would have been, because you knew that this dog had a history, right? So in that case, within a matter of a few months, we paid out about $300,000 on one claim and $600,000 on the second claim.
Wow.
So I think that's something that people need to keep in mind. I know we insure some pet trainers who work with aggressive dogs and dogs that have history of biting. And I'm certainly not saying that you can't work with those kind of dogs, but I think you need to be aware of the fact that your state might have a double liability situation, and you want to be extra careful if you are working with a dog that has a history of biting. That's definitely a time where you want to get something in writing. You want to have the owner acknowledge that, hey, my dog's got a history here. You might want to ask them even, is your homeowner still covering this dog? Because in some situations, the homeowner's policy is going to now exclude the dog, and they have no coverage for the dog anymore. So you just if you know the dog has a history of biting, you might want to ask a few more questions. And you also might want to keep in mind that there's no coverage, at least under our policy, for injuries to you. So sometimes you might just want to think about it. Do I really want to take care of this dog? And I know it's hard, especially right now in our economic climate, to turn jobs down. Yeah. But sometimes that is the right answer. And, sometimes that's just the better thing for everybody, to step away from the claim. Or the dog, I mean, because it's going to be a claim.
Right. Well, in that case, yeah. But yeah, no, you take that of we doing those kind of assessments of going, okay, this is $80 training session for an hour. The liability on this could be $800,000 if something goes wrong. Is that worth it? Right? Is that worth it right now? And just thinking about that and making sure, as you said, everything's documented. That may cause you to change up the schedule of your training or offer different services in a new way to meet that need if you still want to serve that pet, but doing things differently with them because of the history of them and taking all of that into account.
Yeah, or even using a muzzle or something. I know a lot of people don't like muzzles. I don't necessarily want to put one on my dog, but if my dog had bit somebody before, maybe I'd walk her with a muzzle just as an extra sense of protection. I don't want to have a situation where my dog bites somebody. I'd feel horrible if there was a severe injury.
Right. Yeah, that and changing where and how you walk them, not taking them
Yep.
into a cafe or into a crowded market or into a little school with children, right? Don't take them there. Take them somewhere else and start working on them and recommend training and all that kind of thing. And like take the holistic approach to that instead of just going, we'll be fine. It won't happen this time, right?
I think that's really smart. Other large claims that we've seen not related to, dog bites are things like floodings of homes. For example, we had a situation where a pet sitter was told, you can use this bathroom, but you can't use that bathroom. That toilet's broken. And they used the wrong bathroom and the toilet overflowed and it flooded. And they were in an apartment building, actually. So not only did it flood the apartment of the client, but it also caused water damage to the apartment below. And that was several hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yeah. If the owner had not told them that they couldn't use that toilet, I think there's a possibility that would have ended up being a homeowner's type situation. But because they had that communication and they were told not to and they did anyway, now they're negligent. Yeah. And now there's, whoopsies.
Expensive whoopsies.
Yeah.
You mentioned dog trainers. I was curious about what other kind of, if there needed any special insurance for other services as we're all kind of niching down and figuring out and offering new services. So things like if we're offering grooming or pet taxis, what kind of coverages would we need for those kind of things?
Great question. And again, every association is probably be a little bit different, but with Pet Sitters Associates, ours is an a la carte program. So our basic membership provides you with coverage as a traditional pet sitter or dog walker, going into the client's home, feeding the pets, taking the dog for a walk, going to the dog park. It does automatically include pet taxis. We provide coverage for pet taxis up to a 200-mile radius. We used to cover long distance pet taxi. So early on in the conversation, you asked about changes that have been made. So we found a situation where sadly, a lot of dogs were dying in cross country travel. They would get left in the back of the car overnight and, they would die from exhaust fumes and stuff. So we just decided that wasn't something we wanted to be part of anymore. So we limit our pet taxis and transporters to 200 miles because that's not normally going to be overnight. The majority of our pet taxi people are doing like taking the dog to the groomer or the vet, for like an elderly client or something. Mm-hmm. But we do have some situations where, maybe a puppy is purchased 2 hours away and the pet taxi will pick the puppy up and then bring it to the new home,
right.
That kind of thing, right? So that's actually covered under our basic membership. Mm-hmm. But within the pet taxi, we're really just covering an injury to the client pet in a car accident. We're not providing automobile liability. So if the pet taxi gets into a car accident and injures a person or something like that, that's going to fall under auto insurance. Ours really is just kind of covering, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say the cargo of the dogs, that kind of thing.
They're considered property, so that kind of terminology would fit there, right?
Yeah, so that's the best kind of way of looking at it. We're going to cover the animals if they get hurt. Then we have a la carte coverages for the house sitting, which again, we mentioned earlier, is going to be taking care of someone's house without a pet. We have an optional coverage for grooming. We have an optional coverage for dog trainers, dog and cat trainers. We actually have a few cat trainers, a new thing I had never really heard of, but it's more like behavioral training. For the cats, maybe training how to use the litter box or that kind of thing. So dog cat training is one category. We just introduced last year a coverage for show dog handlers. So it's not going to cover if you are your own showing your own personal dog, but if you actually are training and handling show dogs for other people, that's a new coverage that we just added. Our most common probably are the pet daycare and boarding operation. So if you are going to be bringing client pets back to your home, even just one at a time, you now are operating either a pet daycare if it's during the day or a boarding situation if it's overnight. So you need to add that coverage onto your membership to extend the liability insurance to cover your home. So it's not going to cover damage to your house, but it's going to cover, let's say you've got a client pet coming for the day and a friend or the mailman stops over to your house and that person gets bit by the client dog. It's going to cover that kind of scenario. Mm-hmm. Or if you have two dogs staying at your house and they get into a fight, that kind of thing. So it's really important to add that pet daycare and boarding coverage on because unfortunately, at least a few times a year, I get a phone call from a pet sitter who had a situation happen at their house and they didn't add that coverage on. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, you don't have the pet daycare and boarding. And they're like, well, I don't really operate a daycare. I just bring one dog back. Well, that's a daycare. You don't have to have multiple dogs for it to be a daycare. Just one dog. Now it's a daycare. So, and we do in our program limit it to 10 dogs during the day or 5 overnight. And that would apply to cats too. So, I mean, if you're doing the cat boarding, it's 10 animals during the day or 5 overnight. And we limit that because we're not really looking at covering the large operations, the facilities that people have. The dog daycare that my dog goes to is too large for our program. They have like 30 dogs, although they keep them in smaller groups, which makes me very happy as the dog mama. But they actually have 30 dogs there. And then they also are a kennel. So it's just that is too big for the kind of program that we have.
The death of a pet that we care for is always hard to deal with. And as a pet sitter, sometimes we can feel a little lost as to what to do to help out the owner. Well, thankfully, Pet Perennials makes it easy as 1, 2, 3 to send a heartfelt condolence gift directly to someone with a broken heart. They have this awesome direct-to-client gift service that takes the effort off of us and ensures a thoughtful, personalized sympathy gift reaches our client or even our employee. All gift packages include a handwritten card, colorful gift wrap, and shipping fees across the U.S. and Canada. Now, they're releasing an array of milestone gifts and greeting cards throughout 2021 that can be sent to celebrate birthdays, extend get well wishes, and to welcome new or even rescue pets into a family. They also have a few gift options in case you need to send a sympathy gift in memory of a special human client. If you're interested, register for a free account to receive discounted package pricing rather than paying the consumer prices. Since the service is leveraged on an as-need basis, there are no monthly or annual obligation or minimum number of purchases, and that's really the best part. It's an as-you-need-it service, but you get a discount as you sign up for your business. So learn more and register petperennial.com/pages/GPS and use the referral code PSC at registration, where you'll get a unique coupon code to save $2 off any package you send in your first 90 days after you register. Now, on that, if we're bringing them back into our home, is there a way, or do we need to try and add our partner or kids to a policy, or would that fall under the homeowner's policy?
And really, it's going to depend on how you operate your business. So I get that question all the time. If your spouse is going to be helping you with the dogs, you should add them as an extra. It's $90 to add them. But if your spouse isn't, your spouse better than anybody else. So I know you and Megan are different because you both pet sitters, but let's say that it's your business and Megan's like, I want nothing to do with these dogs. I'm not helping, right?
Yep.
So you don't have to add her because she's not going to do anything.
Okay.
But if Megan's going to feed the dogs or even just let them in and out the backyard, it's better, in my opinion, to be safe and just pay the extra $90 so that if she does something wrong, there's coverage. Now, children's a little different. So we do not require that you pay to add minor children who still live with you. And the reason why we don't require that is we feel in the American culture, it's very normal to have people's children helping with business. Mm-hmm. So if you have a 16-year-old daughter and she wants to help walk dogs, we're fine with that. You know your daughter. If you trust your daughter and you've trained her and you feel like she can walk dogs, you don't have to add her as an employee or independent contractor because she's your child and she lives with you. I will remind you, there's no coverage if she gets injured, though. So keep that in mind. Some parents might go, it's not worth the risk. I don't need my 16-year-old daughter to get mauled in the face. So some people might not. But if you have an 18-year-old child, they are no longer a minor, according to the law. So an 18-year-old child who's helping with the business should be added as an employee or independent contractor because they are no longer considered your minor child, even if they live with you. So that's one of those kind of weird things. But I know you have kids, so if you guys had a dog at the house and your kids were playing with it and they were playing a little too rough and the dog hurt itself, you don't have to worry about the fact that your kid's not listed because we expect that that's a normal thing in American culture.
You know your spouse, you know your partner better than anybody else. But that simple fact of they may have to help out 1 time or 2 times periodically. And so just having them covered really is that peace of mind again. So knowing that everything would be taken care of.
Yeah, I think it's a smart thing. I mean, I think I mentioned it earlier. We do provide coverage for incidental helpers. We define an incidental helper as anyone who helps you out less than 30 days total within your membership term, and you pay them less than $600 annually, which is kind of an IRS thing. But we cover the incidental helpers for free because we understand there's going to be situations where you're going to need help just a little bit, and we don't want to make you pay for it. So maybe it's Christmas time and things are extra crazy because everyone's got stuff going on at Christmas. So you need to hire an extra helper for like 2 weeks at Christmas, right?
Yeah.
That's less than 30 days. And as long as you pay them less than $600, they're automatically covered. Or let's say you have the flu and you have jobs scheduled for tomorrow, or sadly right now you've got COVID, and you need someone else to come in and jump in and take care of your dogs for a couple of weeks while you quarantine. Yeah. We don't want you to have to add on somebody and pay the $90 because you need someone to help you out for a couple of weeks. So that's a really special thing within Pet Sitters Associates. I don't know how other programs work, so it's something you'd want to look at if you are a member elsewhere, but we have that sort of extra thing. The only thing about incidental helpers, it does not apply to pet daycare. So if you wanted to have someone help you out and they're going to take dogs back to their house, you do need to add them on, and you do need to add on the pet daycare for their house, because the pet daycare coverage is location specific. We're actually covering the location, which is why it's listed specifically on your membership. So as long as your incidental helper isn't going to go bring them back to their house, you don't have to pay anything.
All those little things to keep track of in your mind, with all of these terms and all these definitions that we've broken down today, like what would you say is one of the biggest misunderstandings or confusing things about insurance that pet sitters have?
Well, kind of like we talked about earlier about people thinking maybe they don't need it because they are only working with their family and friends. I think that's a big thing. When I look at the number of pet sitters in the United States, and then the number of members that we have and the number of members that I know other associations have, I know there's a very large portion of uninsured pet sitters. So either they don't think they have an exposure because they're only working with their family and friends, or they incorrectly think that they've got coverage through their homeowner's policy. Some companies provide coverage for home-based businesses. So your homeowner's insurance, you can add on an endorsement for a home-based business. And without really thinking about it, some pet sitters think, oh, that covers my business. Well, it might cover some things, but it's definitely not going to cover the client pet if it gets injured, which again, one of the biggest claims we see are injuries to the pets. And it's probably, like if you have a major claim, your homeowner's insurance is probably going to be like, yeah, you bought that endorsement, but I don't really know. But we didn't really know what we were covering. So I think the biggest thing is people either not thinking they need insurance, or ignorantly, and I don't mean that to sound bad using the word ignorantly, but not understanding the insurance that they have, thinking it covers more than they do. I think that's a big thing. And I would say just having a good insurance agent would help you. So a lot of people these days buy their homeowners or renters insurance online through a direct resource like Geico or Progressive or whatever. And that's all well and good for just a simple homeowners or renters policy with nothing special on it. But if you have a business, you probably want to look and talk to somebody, a website that you can go to with questions like our program does, or actually like going to someone's office and speaking with them, traditional insurance agent. Yeah. You really want to make sure that you've got really what you need and understand what you have.
In this hour we've been talking so far, like the number of circumstantial kind of conversations that come up of like, ooh, am I covered under this, or what about this? Or all of those kind of things that come up that you may think of. Those are hard to answer during an online FAQ that's printed out, because they're not going to take the time to print out every single possible scenario.
Every hypothetical claim scenario that possibly could come up. The ones that wake you up at 2 a.m. and you're like, those aren't going to be on there, right?
No, they're not. So having somebody to talk to is really huge. And thinking about that, maybe over the last 18 years, what's been one of the more surprising claims that you see, or more, shocking or whatever?
I would say one of the weirdest claims I've ever seen, probably a good 10, 15 years ago. I honestly don't even remember how the claim turned out, but there was a dog daycare situation where there was a unaltered female dog who was a breeding dog. It was a purebred dog that was intent on breeding, right? And it was in heat. And for whatever reason, the pet owner and the pet sitter thought it was fine to have this in-heat dog at the dog daycare with unaltered male dogs, right? Like, I don't know what they were thinking, but they apparently thought that was okay. So the pet sitter was out of the room. And when she came back in, a whole bunch of dogs, together, right? And she separated them thinking it was just a fight. Well, the owner of the female found out the dog was pregnant. But the worst part of it was, well, one, this dog was meant to breed, so they were losing money because they had intent on breeding her, right? So there was that part of the situation. But then the other question was, which dog impregnated her? She was a little dog, and there was a big dog and a little dog that could have impregnated her. And the concern was if she'd been impregnated by the big dog, the puppies would potentially kill her. Because they'd be too big for her to deliver. They'd have to have a C-section and whatnot. So there was this big concern about, one, the loss of money because they couldn't breed it now until the next heat cycle. And two, which dog had impregnated her. Luckily, in the end, I remember it was the smaller dog that had impregnated her, so there wasn't a concern about the injuries, or a C-section or anything. And I do believe that they were able to, adopt out all the puppies because they were still really cute and everything. But I can't remember how much we paid on it or any of the details from that long ago. But I remember thinking that is probably one of the weirdest things I will ever have to deal with.
Didn't know you get the puppy version of Maury out there trying to figure out who the father is.
I know. Today on Jerry Springer.
You are the father. Oh,
you never know what you're going to see in my industry.
Yeah, you never know. And it's always new and different. I'm going to be thinking about that story for a long time now. So there's kind of two things to consider with insurance. Like most of the time, it's either you're just starting out and you need to consider insurance, or maybe you've been in the business a while. How do you reassess? So we'll take those both at a time. Like, what advice would you give to somebody just starting out and getting insurance?
Well, from an insurance perspective, I definitely recommend, looking around at your different options, or if you have friends who are in the pet sitting industry, asking them for references. Typically, people are not shy to tell you if they're unhappy with their insurance. So, I would listen to people, but I also take that with a caveat because sometimes people get grumpy about things that really aren't the insurance company's fault. Right. But I would ask people for advice on who they recommend for insurance, and look around on the internet. Outside of insurance, I would recommend to a new pet sitter that they contact their city, county, and state government to find out if there's any licensing requirements. Every area is different. Some require licensing, some don't. Some situations, you're going to find that the dog park or the county park requires that you have insurance to go there as a pet sitter. In Marin County, California, which is the San Francisco area of California, all pet sitters and dog walkers must have insurance in order to bring their dogs into any of the parks in Marin County. So things like that are good to know. I also recommend contacting an attorney to help you put a contract or a waiver together. Or if you don't want to spend the money on an attorney, you might want to look and see if your area has a small business bureau. Some small communities have small business bureaus that will provide you with either inexpensive or sometimes even free legal advice for small businesses. So that's a resource for you. And then just make sure that you know what kind of services you're going to provide starting out so that you have the insurance to cover those services. As your business grows, likely you might be adding services. So I think it's important to think about that. A lot of times, a pet sitter will join Pet Sitters Associates with the basic insurance or maybe just one or two things, and they don't think about it again. Suddenly they're offering grooming and they don't think to add the grooming coverage on because they just, think about it. Insurance isn't the first thing people think about, right? But whenever you're adding a new service, whenever you're going to be doing something new, you want to make sure that that is going to be covered by your insurance policy. And maybe it already is, or maybe you have to add something on. So, an example of Pet Sitters Associates, go to the website, look at the insurance options page, look at the FAQ page. If your answer is not there, reach out to the association. You're probably going to talk to Elizabeth. That's the office manager at PSA. She's fantastic, super helpful, real friendly. She can answer a lot of the basic questions, but if it gets really insurance specific, she's going to give you to me. and then I'm going to talk with you about the specific scenario. So, and I'm always happy to do that. And I try to like really take the time to talk to people, not just answer their question, but I want to make sure that people understand what they have so that, later on, if there's a claim and they didn't purchase what I told them to, I'll be like, well, we did talk about that. So don't yell at me. I get yelled at sometimes. I'm like, it's not my fault. Don't yell at me.
Right. Well, that's a good reminder of, especially as a lot of us pivoted and started offering new service or different services because of COVID, like we may have done that just to start bringing in income or keep the lights on, but didn't really think about the insurance. So thinking back and going, I started offering grooming. I'm not actually covered for that. So let's go back and get that coverage. And as you grow, those things just happen, but especially now where a lot of us changed, some of us really drastically, making sure our insurance keeps up with us as we change and grow too.
And thinking of COVID, I know that there's a lot of people who are struggling right now. If their clients were mostly people who were going on vacation and now people aren't going on vacation, or a lot of their clients are now working at home and perhaps they don't need the daily dog walks because they're at home. We got a lot of questions from people about just ideas on how to branch out and how to, expand their business during COVID. Some of the ideas that I've heard from people are reaching out to essential workers who maybe you weren't working with before, but now you've got a nurse who is working longer hours and perhaps they need a pet sitter. They didn't need one before, but now they do. Or looking at your clients who are working at home and offering dog walks during Zoom calls. You have an important business meeting on Zoom and your dog is barking in the background. Some companies, not going to be a big deal. Others, you're going to be a little embarrassed, So reaching out to them and saying, hey, I realize that you don't need me to come every day because you're home. But if you've got a Zoom call every Tuesday and Thursday at 2:00, maybe I can walk the dog during that time so you don't have to worry about it. So trying to just think about what, it's different. People don't need you in the same way, but maybe they need you in a different way. Or we've had some dog trainers who are no longer meeting with people in person. They're now offering dog training over Zoom. Right. You still need insurance for that because you're still offering training, but it's okay to do it over Zoom. So there's things like that just kind of think outside the box a little bit.
I know one of the big ones that people started offering were poop scooping and pet taxi. And, if you, that's a great option, especially people staying at home, needing things to get done, run errands. But if that's not something that's covered under your existing policy, right? Like you need to be careful with that and just double check those kind of things to make sure it keeps up.
Yeah. And with Pet Sitters Associates, both of those are covered under the basic membership. And I love pooper scoopers, mostly because I love the names. Like if you're going to pick up poop for a living, they always have the best names. Like our local guy who picks up poop for my house, his name is the Turd Burglars. And I think that's hilarious. So, you got to have a good sense of humor about it.
You do. You got to just be open and honest about it and be like, yep, this is what we do, and we do it awesome. So yeah, they do have good names.
And some pooper scoopers just do pick up in people's yards, but then we have some pooper scoopers who, you go to the park and there's the little post you can get the doggy bags and throw the poop in the thing. So city parks require that the pooper scooper have insurance for that. So that's an interesting way to branch out. If your city doesn't already have that, or your small towns don't necessarily have that, it's an interesting opportunity. You're now doing a service for your community, and the city typically pays people to do that kind of thing because they don't want to pick up the poop, right? So, it's a great a very interesting add-on to people's services. I think another thing I've heard a lot of people are doing is, they've got extra free time because, they're not working as much. So they're volunteering in their community. They're volunteering at the local humane society or the local food shelter. And obviously helping your community is number one priority, but sort of secondarily, it's a great networking opportunity. You're meeting people maybe you wouldn't have met before. Maybe you meet somebody at the food bank, while you're stocking shelves with them, and maybe they don't need a pet sitter, but like, hey, my aunt and uncle probably could use a pet sitter. So it's just another opportunity to get your name out there, your face out there, and also help your community at the same time.
Yeah, which is something that we all want and should be involved in doing. Yeah, Colleen, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to break down all of these things and talk through some of these scenarios and help us understand how we're currently covered and maybe how we can help shore up those sides to make sure that we're better covered moving into the future. I know there's a lot more questions out there, though. It's a big field with lots of possibilities, as we mentioned, though. So how can people get in touch and learn more about their insurance and what kind of coverage they need for their business?
For Pet Sitters Associates, it's going to be the website, which is petsitllc.com. The insurance options page and the FAQ page are very detailed. I helped write them, so it's really explaining all of the coverages that we have. Obviously, not every question that anybody possibly could have would be on there. So I would, if your question isn't answered, then I'd reach out to the association. And like I said, Elizabeth would put you in contact with me if she couldn't answer the basic type questions that you have. If you're not a member of Pet Sitters Associates and you're not sure about your insurance, just ask questions. A good insurance agent's going to take the time to talk to you and answer those questions for you. And if they're not taking the time to help you, then maybe that's a sign that they're not the right insurance agent for you.
Yeah. All red flags for sure on that. They're not helpful. Look for somebody who is going to be, because when you need them to be helpful, right?
Yeah. I always joke that there's only 2 times in life where insurance matters. One, if you have to prove it to get a job, right? You have to provide proof of insurance to walk the dog in the dog park, or, your client wants proof of insurance before you start working for them, right? That's number 1. And then number 2 is when you have a claim, right? Otherwise, insurance is just peace of mind. Yeah. So you want to make sure you've got a good experience with proof of insurance and a good claims experience. Nobody wants to have a claim, but they want a good claims experience. And with Pet Sitters Associates, the insurance company that we work with has a dedicated claims group that works on these claims. So it's not just Joe Schmo claims adjuster. They understand our program. They understand what pet sitters do. You're not going to have to explain what you do on a daily basis. They already understand it all. And they really work hard to make sure that they are covering the claims that they should cover, and obviously denying the ones that they shouldn't. They're going to be covered. That's just the way the world is. Insurance policy can't cover absolutely everything, but we want to make sure that if we do have to deny a claim, we've explained it to you so you understand why, and take the time to do that. It's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that time and that attention. That's that service that you need in those times of uncertainty.
Absolutely.
You. Thank you again so much for coming on, Colleen. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Colin. Anytime.
The importance of having a good, solid, robust, well-covered insurance policy for you and your business cannot go understated here. And regardless of where we get our insurance from, having quality insurance coverage that is covering the services that we provide, that has an agent that can walk us through particular scenarios and work with us and become a partner in helping us to run the best possible business, that peace of mind is absolutely priceless. So if you haven't looked at your insurance policy in a while, dig that thing out, blow off the dust, and flip through it and make sure that it's still covering you the way you want to be covered. And if you don't currently have insurance, start calling around today. Get connected. Reach out to other pet sitters and see what they're using, see what kind of coverages they have, what's worked for them in the past, what are they hoping to change in the future. When we can look around us and assess the liabilities that we are exposed to and start protecting ourselves against those, we can run a more confident business and we can give better service to the people who we want to be serving. We want to thank our sponsors, Time to Pet and Pet Perennials, for making this show possible. And thank you so much for listening. It truly means a lot for you to show up every week, for you to listen, for you to share our episodes. You can see our entire back catalog in whatever podcast app that you're listening to, or head on over to PetSitterConfessional.com. We're on Facebook and Instagram at PetSitterConfessional. We'd love to hear from you, so send an email at feedback@PetSitterConfessional.com. Let us know what you're learning. Let us know what kind of insurance you have, and if you've ever had to use it and what that was like. We'd love to share those kind of stories as well, so others can get an idea of that process. So again, thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back again soon.